Hey there, and welcome to the show. Another slow news weekend. Of course, I'm kidding. So, the U.S. sort of, I guess, depending on your perspective, captured, some are saying kidnapped, the leader of another country. Now, you can decide for yourself what to call it. I suspect, though, it will depend on your politics. But however you describe it, Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro is now in U.S. custody. Maduro and his wife made their first court appearance in federal court on Monday. Maduro faces charges for narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and weapons charges. It's an investigation that goes back several years. A federal indictment says for more than 25 years, Venezuela's leaders abused their positions to help import tons of cocaine into the United States. They're also accused of supporting and protecting major drug trafficking groups. Now, in addition, Maduro's wife is accused of ordering kidnappings and murders and accepting bribes. Now, as you'd expect, there are many questions about Venezuela's future, and there seems to be a lot of confusion and mixed signals from the Trump administration. On Saturday, during the press conference, President Trump said the U.S. is in charge and is going to be running Venezuela.
We're going to run the country right. It's going to be run very judiciously, very fairly.
On Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio tried clarifying that, saying it didn't mean that the U.S. would be governing Venezuela day to day like it did in Iraq. Instead, he said the administration would keep a military quarantine in place. U.S. forces will prevent oil tankers on a U.S. sanctions list from entering and leaving Venezuela until the government there makes changes that the U.S. wants to see. Rubio says that's a tremendous amount of leverage that will not just further the national interest of the United States, but also lead to a better future for the people of Venezuela. Now, Venezuela's Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, is now the acting president. She was Maduro's handpicked VP, so she was part of his regime. Some observers say that they thought maybe the U.S. would help the opposition party, led by Nobel Prize laureate Maria Machado, to take power. They, after all, the opposition party, have been calling for democracy in Venezuela, and independent polling showed that they had actually won the presidential election there in 2024 overwhelmingly. But Maduro claimed that he won and refused to cede power.
I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect to be the leader.
Now, Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, initially struck a defiant tone on Saturday, demanding the return of Maduro. By Sunday night, she was sounding more diplomatic, saying that the Venezuelan people and the region deserve peace and dialogue, not war. We extend an invitation to the U.S. government to work together on a cooperative agenda oriented towards shared development within the framework of international law and to strengthen lasting community coexistence, she wrote on her Instagram. Now, many people, including many Americans, say the capture of Nicolas Maduro isn't about drugs like the government, like the Trump administration is saying. They say this is really about oil. One of the changes the U.S. wants to see is to the Venezuelan oil industry. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world, more than 300 billion barrels. However, it only produces 1 million barrels a day, just 1% of global production. Now, several factors have played a role in why Venezuela hasn't produced a lot of oil: government mismanagement, international sanctions, and that country's economic crisis. President Trump says that he wants to get the oil flowing again and says American oil companies would help make that possible.
And we're going to get the oil flowing the way it should be. As you know, it was just a minor flow. It was actually a minor flow for what they have. But we're going to run it properly, and we're going to make sure the people of Venezuela are taken care of. We're going to make sure the people that were forced out of Venezuela by this thug are also taken care of.
Energy analysts say increasing Venezuela's oil production will cost billions, tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions, and would take years. And that timeline would no doubt depend on the stability of the country. Oil companies would need to make sure that their employees would be safe in Venezuela, that the government, whether that's a government led by factions of Maduro's regime or what's left of it, or a new government, wouldn't collapse and the country fall into chaos. All of that factors into this, and because of that uncertainty, it could mean the U.S. will be intimately involved in Venezuela's affairs in some capacity for a very long time to come. These things, after all, have a way of not going as expected. Which brings me to this. Why should Americans care about Venezuela? Many Americans couldn't even find it on a map. Venezuela may seem far away, but what happens there affects everyday Americans. First, as I said, Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia's. And changes there can ripple through the global energy market, affecting gas prices here at home. That's one reason to care. It's also a security issue. U.S. officials say parts of Venezuela's government have enabled drug trafficking networks that sent cocaine to the United States. And instability in Venezuela drives regional migration, with many Venezuelans seeking safety and work in neighboring countries. Some 8 million people have left since 2014, and some ultimately, as we know, came to the U.S., adding to broader immigration and humanitarian challenges. And finally, Venezuela is strategically important in the global balance of power. Rival countries like China and Russia have deep ties there, and U.S. policymakers see influence in the Western Hemisphere as part of national security and economic interest. So while most Americans may never visit, again, many couldn't even find Venezuela on a map, Venezuela's economy, its security and politics intersect with U.S. interest in very real ways. Now, while Venezuela is dominating the headlines, another important story came out over the holiday break, and it's timely with the 5-year anniversary of January 6th. House Republicans have released a closed-door deposition of former special counsel Jack Smith, offering a rare look at why he brought federal charges against President Donald Trump and how he defended those decisions under intense questioning. Smith appeared behind closed doors before the House Judiciary Committee on December 17th, and Republicans who run that committee published a nearly 300-page transcript and 8-hour-long video on New Year's Eve, which, in case you didn't know, is a day when not a lot of people are paying attention. So if you want to dump news that might be unfavorable to your narrative, doing so on a holiday is a good time, FYI. Now, in that deposition, Smith forcefully rejected claims from Republican lawmakers that his investigations were politically motivated. He said the evidence that he collected into Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election made it clear that Trump was, in his words, by a large measure, the most culpable and most responsible person in the plot to block the peaceful transfer of power, and that the January 6th riot or insurrection would not have happened without him.
Now, people with different views than you can say the special counsel's office is only interested in prosecuting President Trump because an election's coming up and he's going to be the Republican nominee. And the special counsel works for a Democratic president. The special counsel works for a Democratic attorney general. And so the special counsel's laser focus on President Trump is simply to prevent him from either being the party's nominee or being a successful party's nominee, or at the very least, keeping him off the campaign trail. How do you respond to that?
Okay. All of that is false, and I'll say a few things. The first is the evidence here made clear that President Trump was, by a large measure, the most culpable and most responsible person in this conspiracy. These crimes were committed for his benefit. The attack that happened at the Capitol as part of this case does not happen without him. The other co-conspirators were doing this for his benefit. So in terms of why we would pursue a case against him, I entirely disagree with any characterization that our work was in any way meant to hamper him in the presidential election.
Smith also defended his use of investigative tools, including obtaining phone records tied to lawmakers who communicated with Trump associates during the certification effort, saying that those records were limited to call metadata and were relevant because Trump himself directed those contacts. Smith denied any involvement of political influence from the Biden administration in the decisions to pursue 2 major cases, one on election interference and one on classified documents, and said that he would have pursued the cases based on the facts and the law, not political considerations. However, because of Justice Department policy and the fact that Trump was reelected in 2024, the cases were dropped before they could ever go to trial. I'd encourage you to go find the full video of Smith's deposition on YouTube. It's posted on the House Judiciary's GOP's page, as well as a number of YouTube pages belonging to several news sites. It is over 8 hours long. If you don't have time, maybe just watch the first hour. You'll probably learn a lot. All right, so I'll be back later this week with more news, including what's on Congress's agenda now that they're back from their holiday recess. Will they address rising healthcare costs? And what about that fraud investigation taking place in Minnesota? Governor Tim Walz announced that he will not be seeking a 3rd term after all. That's huge. So I'll have that and more coming up later this week. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.